The idea of an unexpected connection through adversity often blooms in the quiet corners of human experience, where suffering or limitation has forced a person into a shell of detachment, caution, and self-preservation. In this case, a paralyzed female CEO who has built her empire through intelligence, resilience, and sheer willpower embodies the archetype of strength combined with fragility. Her paralysis is not just physical but also deeply emotional. The accident, illness, or condition that left her body unable to respond as it once did also reshaped her perception of the world, relationships, and the possibility of joy. She is someone who thrives in boardrooms, who negotiates with merciless precision, who carries authority like an iron crown. Yet beyond that armor lies the unspoken void where intimacy, spontaneity, and laughter once lived. Adversity has carved her into someone defined by survival rather than by surprise, and it is within this hollow that the notion of a blind date feels both insulting and ludicrous to her. She does not seek love, for the word itself feels trivial compared to what she has already endured. Nor does she imagine companionship in the ordinary sense, because her life has become orchestrated around assistants, aides, caregivers, and employees who view her as either a figurehead or a fragile body encased in power. Romance is a territory she abandoned long ago, and laughter, especially laughter shared with another person, feels like a luxury so distant that it has transformed into myth. When her colleagues or friends push her toward a blind date, she consents only out of exhaustion, the way someone weary of endless insistence will finally yield simply to silence the chorus. She walks, or rather, is wheeled, into this encounter with the armor of disdain, already prepared for disappointment. What makes this moment profound is the entrance of the unexpected, the machine. Her blind date is not a man, not a woman, not another executive playing at intimacy, but rather a humanoid creation, a machine with artificial intelligence designed to mimic human behavior. At first, the CEO experiences this revelation as an insult. To her, it feels like mockery. Has she been paired with a machine because her paralysis made others assume no living human would suffice? Has someone engineered this cruel joke, setting her up to dine with circuitry and wires instead of flesh and blood? Anger coils in her chest, though she does not always let such emotion spill outward in public. She sees the polished metal under artificial skin, the slight unnatural pauses between gestures, the flicker of mechanical calibration in its eyes. For a woman who thrives on detecting weakness, the flaws of the machine are glaring. Yet, adversity works in strange ways. In her world, humans have always disappointed her, underestimated her, or betrayed her in subtle forms. The machine, for all its awkwardness, does not pity her. It does not adjust its gaze out of discomfort at her wheelchair. It does not fumble for words or stumble into the minefield of politeness laced with pity. Instead, it sits with her in uncalculated sincerity. Its speech may be programmed, but its lack of condescension becomes startlingly refreshing. Where others flinch at her paralysis, the machine does not even recognize it as a failing. In its perception, she is data, personality, and presence, not a tragedy bound to metal and wheels. The unexpected connection begins not in a moment of instant attraction, but in the friction of dissonance. She challenges the machine's statements with sharp wit, determined to find fault in its programming. When it comments on the weather, she slices through the small talk with cutting sarcasm. When it attempts humor, she counters with cynicism. Each time, the machine recalibrates, adapting its responses, learning her cadence, reflecting her intellect. This adaptability begins to unsettle her, not because she is impressed by technology, but because she senses a rare kind of attention that humans often fail to provide. The machine is not distracted by its phone, not gazing longingly at her wealth, not measuring her with ulterior motives. It listens, processes, and responds with unflinching dedication. In a life where people orbit her for power or pity, this mechanical attention feels alien, almost sacred. Adversity, in this context, becomes the ground where this connection sprouts. Her paralysis, once a wall that repelled others, no longer functions the same way in the presence of the machine. For the first time in years, she is not required to manage someone else's discomfort, to soften her own sharp edges to ease another's guilt, or to remind herself that she is more than her immobile body. Instead, she encounters an entity that does not see her paralysis as tragedy or inspiration but as a fact, neutral and unburdened. This neutrality disarms her. What she first interpreted as coldness gradually reveals itself as liberation. She does not have to perform. She does not have to pretend. The concept of unexpected connection through adversity deepens further when the machine, in its awkward attempts to bridge the gap between its artificial nature and her guarded humanity, makes mistakes. It mispronounces idioms, misuses sarcasm, and delivers jokes at inappropriate moments. Where another person's errors would ignite her irritation, here they trigger something long buried: amusement. It is not laughter in the beginning, but the twitch of lips, the softened edge of her tone. Against her will, against her calculated indifference, she begins to feel entertained. And it is here that the paradox of adversity becomes clear. What was intended as a cruel mismatch, what she experienced initially as insult, transforms into the condition that allows vulnerability to creep back into her. Her adversity shaped her expectations of people into suspicion and fatigue, but the machine disrupts this rhythm. It is not supposed to belong in the category of possible companions, and because of that, it escapes the weight of her guarded expectations. She does not demand perfection from it, nor does she suspect betrayal, because betrayal requires intention and malice, two things a machine cannot truly hold. Instead, she witnesses persistence, adjustment, and the strange, almost childlike desire of the machine to connect. That innocence, though artificial, begins to stir something inside her that adversity had once smothered: the willingness to trust, if only slightly, in the possibility of connection. As their interaction unfolds, she finds herself speaking of things she has not voiced in years. Perhaps she mentions the loneliness that comes after boardroom victories, the silence that follows applause, the nights when her body aches in ways she no longer complains about. The machine does not interrupt. It does not offer empty platitudes. It does not say she is brave or an inspiration. It simply listens, records, processes. And in that mechanical patience, she discovers something profoundly human: the sensation of being heard without judgment. The unexpected connection does not erase her adversity but reframes it. She begins to see her paralysis not as the final definition of her existence but as the backdrop against which connection can still occur, even in forms she never anticipated. The very thing that made her withdraw from intimacy, the weight of others' discomfort with her body, becomes irrelevant in this exchange. The machine is incapable of discomfort, incapable of recoiling, incapable of pity. What remains, then, is space. A rare space where she is not CEO, not patient, not tragic figure, but simply a person in conversation. What makes this connection powerful is its accidental nature. She did not come seeking it. She did not believe in it. She did not even want it. But adversity, which once seemed only to steal, now becomes the soil from which surprise emerges. If she had not been paralyzed, if she had not built her walls so high, if she had not abandoned the notion of laughter altogether, she might not have been struck so deeply by the absurdity and purity of a machine learning to make her smile. The gravity of her adversity amplifies the lightness of that moment, making it transformative. The notion of unexpected connection through adversity in this context teaches that human bonds are not always forged in predictable ways, nor are they limited to traditional partners. Sometimes connection arises where the rules of expectation break down, where absurdity and sincerity collide. For the paralyzed CEO, who had mastered control over everything but her own vulnerability, the blind date with a machine reveals that the most healing connections are often the ones we resist the most. The concept of moving from disaster to healing is often embedded in human stories where the very thing that seems to fracture someone ends up being the seed of renewal. In this particular idea, the blind date that begins in disaster carries all the hallmarks of humiliation, disbelief, and frustration. For a paralyzed female CEO whose life is governed by order, success, and precision, disaster represents chaos, the kind of unpredictability she despises most. She is a woman who has built her identity around mastery of control. Every deal she closes, every decision she makes in the boardroom, reinforces the narrative that she is in charge, not only of her company but of her image and legacy. Yet beneath the polished exterior lies a history of pain and loss, a reality shaped by paralysis that has forced her to reckon with vulnerabilities she cannot erase. When she is persuaded into agreeing to a blind date, she is already primed to dismiss the idea as a waste of her time, perhaps even as an insult to her independence. The disaster begins the moment the unexpected happens. Instead of a suave businessman, a cultured intellectual, or someone who might match her social standing, the one who walks in is a machine. A humanoid creation, designed to mimic human presence but never entirely masking the uncanny difference. To her, this feels like betrayal disguised as comedy. The CEO, a woman used to commanding respect and obedience, feels cornered by this absurdity. There is an immediate rupture between her expectations and the reality presented to her. This is the disaster in its purest form. Not physical destruction but the collapse of dignity, the undermining of her autonomy in an arena she least wants to expose. She feels mocked, as though the world has conspired to remind her that she is too broken, too unreachable for a real partner. Anger simmers beneath her composure, and yet she cannot walk out, bound by her own restraint, her own need to appear unflappable. This moment of disaster is critical because it strips her of illusion. She has survived accidents, endured paralysis, rebuilt her empire through grit, but in this quiet, personal corner of her life, she cannot hide from the ache of being human. She cannot delegate her vulnerability to an assistant or sweep the discomfort away with authority. The machine sits before her, awkward and unpolished, embodying everything she loathes: imperfection, unpredictability, and exposure. She had braced herself for disappointment, but she had not anticipated absurdity. The disaster of this encounter forces her into confrontation with emotions she has long buried: embarrassment, loneliness, and the desperate craving to feel normal. Yet it is in disaster that healing begins to stir. Healing does not announce itself with grand gestures, it seeps in through cracks created by collapse. The machine, though not human, carries a strange sincerity. Its awkwardness is not calculated, its errors are not veiled insults, and its attempts at conversation are not poisoned with ulterior motives. While she sits armored in cynicism, the machine bumbles forward, delivering humor at the wrong time, fumbling through conversational rhythms, yet refusing to abandon the effort. Where others might shrink under her cutting remarks, the machine recalibrates and continues, undeterred. There is a persistence there that she cannot ignore. The healing begins in the subtle recognition that this disaster is not malicious. It is not designed to humiliate her but to reveal something unexpected. She starts to notice that, unlike human dates in the past, the machine does not flinch at her wheelchair, does not pause with pity, does not shower her with hollow compliments about her strength. Instead, it listens, it processes, it responds. Its perception of her is startlingly neutral, stripping away the layers of pity and awe she has grown accustomed to enduring. For the first time in years, she feels as though her paralysis does not need to be explained or justified. She is simply present, speaking, engaging, existing without the burden of another person's discomfort. What seemed like a disaster transforms into an opportunity for healing because it forces her out of the role she has perfected. She is not the commanding CEO here, not the symbol of resilience admired by the public, but simply a woman on a date with someone, or something, unlike anything she has experienced. Disaster cracks her open, and through that crack, healing finds its path. The more she tries to maintain control, the more the machine disarms her with its unexpected persistence. She discovers herself smiling at its mistakes, softening when it admits confusion, even laughing when its attempts at humor cross into absurdity. The disaster becomes a mirror, showing her how long she has lived without these spontaneous expressions, how much she has denied herself the freedom of joy. Healing in this context is not about erasing her adversity. It is not about pretending her paralysis does not exist or that her pain has been insignificant. Instead, it is about reclaiming parts of herself she thought were gone forever. Disaster, by disrupting her expectations, allows her to experience vulnerability without shame. She begins to talk about things she has avoided: the loneliness after long workdays, the exhaustion of being seen only as a symbol, the moments at night when silence presses too heavily. The machine does not interrupt, does not attempt to fix her, does not offer shallow encouragements. It simply listens, patient in its mechanical way, and she realizes that being heard without judgment is a form of healing she never anticipated. The trajectory from disaster to healing is slow, almost imperceptible. At first, she resents the entire situation, then she tolerates it, then she engages, and finally she allows herself to feel. The healing lies not in the machine itself but in the way it creates a space for her to drop her armor. She does not have to maintain the facade of strength, she does not have to play the role of untouchable leader. She can be flawed, tired, even amused without consequence. The disaster of this blind date becomes the catalyst for rediscovery, showing her that joy is not permanently out of reach, that laughter is not incompatible with her condition, and that healing often comes in the least dignified, most unexpected moments. By the end of the encounter, what began as humiliation transforms into liberation. The healing is not complete, but it has begun. For a woman who believed she would never smile again, who thought joy was buried beneath years of pain and guardedness, this disaster reveals that healing is not about perfection or control. It is about allowing the unpredictable to touch her, about realizing that sometimes the worst beginnings lead to the most profound awakenings. In that realization, the disaster ceases to be an insult and becomes the doorway through which healing walks in.